All right. Thanks everyone for coming. So welcome to my talk, Reproducible Drupal Environments the Easy Way, a hands-on look at using Drupal with Nix and NixOS. It's a bit of a mouthful. I'm Andrew Benbow, and I'm putting this talk on because I work with Nix and I work with Drupal. They're both great tools, but I don't often see them used together, and I think that that should change. And as of course, you might be able to tell by the title, we are going to be talking about both of those. But the real topic of today is how we build software environments to run Drupal. So before we get to any of that, let's just take a quick look at my background. So like Vladimir said, I am a Drupal developer. I'm a web developer primarily. I've been doing that for about 6 years. I started with WordPress and Django, but I got into Drupal pretty early on, and I've just stuck with it ever since. I maintain a few modules, and of course, I build websites for a living, mainly using Drupal. I'm also a pretty big Linux fan. And in 2022, I discovered this Linux distribution that kind of blew my mind at the time, called Nix OS. And I actually have since started working on Nix OS as a maintainer. And I actually am currently developing a tool that integrates Drupal and Nix OS so that they can work together. And that is what I am going to be talking about. But first, before we get to any of that, let's just take a quick poll. Who here has heard of Nix? Just quick raise of hands. OK. Who here has used Nix or Nix OS? OK, that's about what I expected. So although Nix is a really cool project, it's still fairly unknown to a lot of tech circles. So I'm going to take some time to talk about what Nix is, why it's useful, and how it solves some problems in some pretty interesting ways as it relates to web hosting. So first of all, what is Nix? Why should I care? Well, Nix is a cross-platform package manager. But just calling it that, I think, misses a lot of nuance about what it is. It's also a build system, and a software environment manager, and a functional programming language. It's a lot of different things. But at its core, it is a package manager, like apt or brew or DNF, insofar as it downloads software, puts it somewhere on your computer, and resolves dependencies. But is that really the criteria we should be using to define what a package manager is? By that definition, is a bash script a package manager? Is a flash drive a package manager? What about Docker? You think Docker's a package manager? Am you and I, package managers? And these are some strange questions you might start asking if you try to boil this term down. And I think that's because our assumption of what a package manager is actually quite wrong. And it doesn't just download software. It changes the software environment that you're working on. And it might do this in some fairly unexpected ways that you will swear up and down you did not want to have happen, but now you're stuck with it. And Nix clarifies a lot of the guesswork in this process. And it enables you to be confident and knowledgeable about the changes that Nix is going to make to your environment by making you be explicit about them. What does that mean? How does that work? Well, the package manager uses a programming language, also called Nix, in order to describe the environment that you want it to build at a fairly high level. And it doesn't have like a traditional package repository. Instead, it uses a tool called Nix packages in order to build most of the software it uses. And Nix packages is huge. It is the largest free public repository of software in the world, and it is completely written using Nix. And this might feel kind of weird having to learn a programming language just to download Python or whatever. But doing so with Nix comes with some unique advantages. So you can actually use the language to configure a package or a set of packages before you download them so that they work a certain way on your final system when you actually go to use it. You can actually also define an entire development environment using the language. It's also highly portable. But I think where Nix really shines is in the way that it builds things. So Nix, the build system. Let's see. Nix, the build system, allows you to build packages in isolation from one another, which ensures that they are fully reproducible and that they don't have any undeclared dependencies. Therefore, if a package works on one machine, it will also work on another, even if they're completely different CPU architectures. So Nix also makes it really easy to share development environments for your projects, even if they're using very different languages or tooling systems. So in a sense, the package manager consumes configuration files written in Nix, and it builds an environment where all of that configuration is in effect. If you were to take your configuration and give it to someone else, they could build the exact same environment that you're using, even at a bitwise scale. And the big kicker, as long as you're using Nix, and the big kicker about this is that all of this is running on native hardware. There's no containerization, there's no virtualization layers. This is all running on your native hardware. Which brings us to NixOS, which is just another thing that Nix can build. It is a full-featured Linux operating system that is completely built and configured with the Nix package manager and the Nix language. And it has some cool features as a result of being built with multiple layers of isolation and reproducibility. It ensures that installing or upgrading a single package cannot break another package in that system. It allows you to roll back to any previously working build that you've ever done. And it ensures that no part of the system is in an inconsistent state during an upgrade. So all these things come together to make Nix and NixOS really great for building web servers, which is why NixOS is really popular among cloud computing people, DevOps folks, and that's also why I got interested into it. So to kind of put all this in perspective, I want to take some time to compare how Nix and NixOS stacks up against some of the common tools in our practice. So let's say that your job is to build a web server for running Drupal. What are the kinds of tools that you typically reach? Linux for starters, probably. Maybe something like Debian or Ubuntu. But you'll still need to customize the base image pretty heavily before you can use it. You're going to need to install a web server, a firewall, PHP, a database, SSH, GitOps, encryption, just like a ton of different things. And normally you'd maybe do this by hand, and maybe write a script to help you do that, and then just hope it doesn't break in between different releases. In NixOS, you can actually just use the Nix language to describe the end state of that image at a fairly high level. And the package manager just builds it for you if it can. And if something's not quite right, Nix will actually stop and tell you so you can fix it before it does anything. So that's cool, but what about upgrades? Well, in a traditional operating system, you can kind of do granular updates using things like package pinning, but you kind of have to preempt it. Otherwise, the system will just take whatever the latest upstream tells it to take, and that can get you in trouble. This means that things like Ubuntu latest or even Debian stable are actually moving targets. If someone pushes a patch to a core system overnight for one of those distributions, and then you build a new server with it the next day, it's actually going to be in an inconsistent state from all of your other infrastructure. So even if you're using the same image, it might be a different computer. So that means you might be in a state where it's difficult to recover from, and it's in an unknown state. So by comparison, Nix uses system-wide dependency pinning by default. And it also gives you the ability to host all of your configuration out of Git and deploy it everywhere when you are ready to do so. And because of the power of Nix, if it builds successfully once, your configuration, it will build successfully everywhere else too. So if you're actually not sure how an upgrade will behave, you can actually pull that configuration down onto a local laptop and do live auditing on that machine directly before you push it out to your final system. Okay, that's cool. But what about backups, rollbacks, all these things? Well, with traditional tools, you'll typically need to develop a bunch of different scripts to back up the individual parts of your system one at a time. Things like your configuration, your infrastructure, and also your user data. In Nix, you'll still need to find a way of backing up your user data, but actually, Nix takes care of backing up your configuration and your infrastructure for you. And it does this because every build that you make with Nix is actually preserved, not as like a whole system image, but just as the parts that differ between each individual build. And you can actually switch back and forth between these different builds, just kind of at boot time or whenever you want to. So in a real sense, a version control system like Git becomes a major part of your backup strategy. So another sort of strategy that people use to overcome all of these innate operating system problems is to turn to something like containerization, but that has its own challenges, as we're going to see. So let's say you turn to Docker or Podman, and your goal is to try and containerize a dev and a deploy environment at the same time so that they have the same code base and that they have some of the same build tools. Only dev and deploy, those things aren't that similar. You might need different tools and different configuration for each one. You might even need 2 separate build environments in order to get them to build correctly. So now instead of just being responsible for 2 containers, maybe you have 3 or 4 or more, plus a CI/CD pipeline for each one, maybe a different build step for each one, and that can get kind of out of control if you're just doing this all in-house. So maybe you turn to a container store to streamline some of this work. You can download an image for PHP, a web server, a database, only you'll still need to kind of hook them up to one another, and you'll also need to configure them to run whatever your app is, Drupal in this case. And so in a real sense, you actually have a difficult configuration interface because they might be different from each container, especially if they're contributed. So you really have, instead of one system, you have multiple pieces of software working together to pretend like they're a single system, which makes it hard to audit, hard to inspect, and hard to deploy. So in NixOS, you have a single configuration interface via the Nix language. And as for managing environmental differences, you can actually write a special piece of configuration called a flake. And the flake is kind of like the composer.json files of Nix. And it gives you the ability to define multiple build targets at the same time so that they have the same code base and they're all using the same build tools. You can actually take this a step further and use the Nix language to define all of your development tool chain, any security considerations, any external services that your app needs to connect to, and then integrate all of those pieces as Nix configuration one at a time, but only to the build targets that need it. So in a real sense, you have one tool that takes care of all this work. It's highly interoperable, it's predictable, it's easy to manage at a high level, and it's easy to audit. So that means there's no more guesswork and no more of this guy. So that's Nix in a nutshell. But what does any of this have to do with Drupal? Well, last year I was at DrupalCon Atlanta, and I attended a talk by John Locke, this talk, in fact. John runs a Drupal agency in the States. And he was talking about using Nix to make a replacement to DDEV, the preferred local development environment for Drupal. And he was specifically trying to make a tool that made it possible to have highly specialized, easy-to-share local development environments. And he came up with a tool called Drupal Flake. It's on Drupal.org, and his talk is really great. Go check both of those out. I was at this talk, and at the end I asked him if he had considered using Drupal and Nix together in a production environment. And he said no. His agency doesn't really do that, and besides, this tool wasn't really designed to fix that. But I thought that something like that ought to exist. So I went home and I did some research, and I found that there was no official port of Drupal into NixOS or Nix packages. And I did a little bit of research, and I found that there was a PR that had gotten some of the work started. But the original author had just gotten too busy. They weren't able to finish it. So I reached out to them and asked if they wanted to work together to carry that work over the finish line. And in May of last year, actually exactly 1 year from today, which is surprising, didn't know that when I was building this, we got our first pull request merged into Nix packages. And I've been improving it since that time, adding new features and keeping up with it. And I'm actually now the sole developer on this integration. So at this point, I have a tool that I think will make it possible to package, manage, and ship Drupal in a fully reproducible way. And that is what I want to show you today. So in NixOS, you can toggle on or off entire groups of software that are pre-configured and designed to work together to form what is called a service. This can be something like a firewall or a media server, or in this case, it could be Drupal. So using this simple configuration, you can just turn Drupal on. And taking a bit of a closer look at this one file, this is a Nix file in the Nix programming language, and it contains a Nix function. All functions in Nix are anonymous, and they are signified by that colon right there. And they accept a single input on the left-hand side, and they return a single output on the right-hand side. This function accepts a data type called a set or an attribute set, and it returns one as well. And inside, you can actually see I'm saying, turn Drupal on. So then you could take a file like this, and you could go to your system configuration in NixOS, and you could import it into the imports attribute here at the top. And then by the way, that configuration is located at etc nixos configuration.next. That's where your default configuration is. Then you could run this command telling Nix to rebuild your system, enabling Drupal in the process. And then you can just go and install Drupal like you would any other installation via the UI. Except first, you'll actually need to reboot your computer. This is a known bug. This is going to get fixed soon, so stay tuned. But yeah, after you reboot your system, you can just go to localhost, and you'll see Drupal. And then you can just go ahead and install how you would any other way. And that one line of code that I showed you will actually install the latest version of Drupal. This screenshot's a little old. As well as MariaDB, Nginx, Caddy, if you wanted to use that, and PHP FPM. So it will also configure all of these services to work together out of the box so that they support Drupal. It feels simple, maybe even a little simplistic. But under the hood, that one line of configuration actually resolves to this monster. And don't worry, you don't need to memorize or write any of this in order to get Drupal to run. This is just the default configuration interface. And you can override any of these attributes as you need to. But this actually includes tools, as you can see, for like changing file names and file paths, managing your database, changing your web server, and even changing your default Drupal package, which is what I'm going to show you how to do next. So this configuration actually pins Drupal to a specific release tag, or a commit if you wanted to do that. And in Nix, this is what is called a package override. It tells Nix to use a familiar recipe, Drupal in this case, but to change some of the parameters at build time. And in this example, I'm actually telling Nix to fetch a release of Drupal 10. And by the way, all these code samples that I'm showing are going to be available in a repo that I'm going to share at the end of this talk. So taking this idea a step further, you could then take this configuration, which installs 2 different versions of Drupal on the same machine at the same time, but they're accessible at different URLs. And this pinned package variable at the top is actually from the previous slide, so these kind of work together. You could use this to keep like one website at a certain version without affecting other sites. That could be good for a migration or a tricky upgrade. So far, the solution I've been talking about just works great for Drupal core. If that's all you want to do and you just want to track the latest release of Drupal core, you can do that. I try to keep up with it in Nix packages, and that'll be just fine. But you and I know that most people do not do that. They typically will make their own custom Drupal and then just add all the bells and whistles on it. And you can do this too, but you'll need to package the source code yourself. And here's how you do that. So in this configuration, I am packaging up the sector Drupal distribution. And I chose sector for this example because it has a few more bells and whistles than core. It behaves like an existing Drupal installation, so it kind of is good for testing. It has all this configuration and files that are kind of bundled with it. So at the top, you can see I am making a new package definition, and I'm assigning it to a variable called sector. And then I'm actually using a package builder that comes with Nix packages called Build Composer Project 2, which is right there at the top. And I'm defining where to pull the source code from, kind of below. And this is all pretty standard stuff. This is actually how the base package for Drupal gets built in Nix packages with just a few changes. I literally just copied and pasted the implementation and modified it the way I needed to. And if you're getting started with Nix, that's generally like a good practice. Get in the habit of doing that. So this builder is actually pulling from a personal Codeberg of mine. I created this project using DDev, and I published it online as a sample. And then so you could take this sector variable and feed it into your configuration, and you'd end up with this guy right here. So this is a fully operational Drupal installation that is running on my laptop, which is running NixOS. And this is pulling from a remote code base. You could copy the code sample I just showed you on the previous slide, plug it into your configuration, and you would have the exact same environment that I'm using on my own computer. So that is that. Let's go take a look at this page. Great. So we just saw that. So all this is great for building Drupal, but web hosting is more than just deploying apps, right? So how do you manage some of the more like non-Drupal parts of your server, the more mundane stuff? There are solutions for that as well, and I'll show you a couple of those. Here's a configuration that I threw together that implements automatic database backups for every Drupal installation on your website. And this just runs on a systemd timer right now. But I think it'd be worth finding out how to trigger something like this every time you rebuild your system so that you have a database backup and a snapshot of your system at the exact same time. So you can roll back to that if you had to. And in this simple configuration, I am enabling some supporting services for Drupal that come with NixOS out of the box. Things like Redis, Varnish, Elasticsearch, stuff that you could connect to afterwards using a contributed module. And in this final sample, I'm showing some examples of how you could harden your security posture using Nix. So this is actually using the Linux hardened kernel. It's disabling UID escalation by disabling sudo, and it activates disk decryption at boot time. And there's a lot of things you could do in the name of security for like any distribution, and it may not be that obvious. If you wanted to take some of the guesswork out of it, I would go check out this cool project called Securix, which is a hardened minimal NixOS. And it features a lot of government-grade security sort of built into it. And that's because the French government is actually building this right now for use in their systems. This is how they're kind of approaching digital sovereignty these days. And it's free for anyone who wants to use it. It's online. Just note that the repository is completely in French. So be prepared for that. OK, so as things stand right now, this tool that I've kind of been showing you for running Drupal, I consider it kind of be in an open beta stage. Later this month, in May, the newest version of NixOS is going to be released, featuring all the cool things I've shown you here, as well as support for custom Drupal packages. So if you're keen on trying that out and you don't want to wait, you won't have to. There will be a new stable release of NixOS where you can try all of this out this month. So, all right, let's talk about some use cases, how you might be able to use this project. So you could just use this to run Drupal with just some extra DevOps goodies. That's a perfectly legitimate way to use this. You could also use this to distribute a bunch of servers that are running the same code. This pairs really well with something like Kubernetes, where you could actually use a single configuration to define multiple servers in a cluster and have them deterministically linked together using the Nix language. So then you can just deploy them, scale them whenever you want to. This could also be really cool for like a locked down client website that uses your Drupal distribution, but it gives the client the ability to have a little bit of customization. Maybe they could upload a custom module or a custom theme. This integration supports that as well. And or like the French government, you could have like a highly customized server built up to a specification. So digital sovereignty and self-determination are really important topics these days. You could use just Nix as like another tool in your toolbox to sort of chart a path towards, away from big tech. So keep that in mind. So all of this seems great, but every project has its own downsides, so we should be talking about that as well. So the first thing is that like learning how to use Nix and NixOS, you have to know the Nix language, and it can be a bit of an adjustment if you're not used to that or to functional programming in general. So there are a ton of tutorials that are online, and a lot of them are really great. I'm going to be sharing some at the end of this talk. And there's also a Nix channel on Drupal Slack if you want to join that and kind of join the community. There's a lot of support there as well. And another challenge that this integration presents, and really just a lot of this are just the side effects of how Nix approaches building software. So one of these challenges is that everything that Nix builds gets put into a read-only file system called Nix Store. And that includes parts of your Drupal integration, like your vendor directory and all of your upstream code. So this presents a bit of a challenge because Drupal expects some parts of itself to be writable by users at install time. So this Drupal integration sidesteps that issue by putting some of your site resources in different locations, as seen here. So on the left column here is everything in the Nix store. Everything in there is immutable and read-only. And on the right-hand side is something called the state directory. Every website gets one of these, and everything in there can be edited either by the web server or by users with the proper permissions. And these two locations are actually strategically sim-linked together so that Drupal treats it like a single file system, and it actually allows you to install it. So this particular caveat kind of makes it so this tool is better suited as a deployment tool rather than a development tool. If you need development, go check out John Locke's Drupal Flake project. That's really helpful, and these two projects kind of support each other in that sense. And the final caveat, just kind of about NixOS in general, is that everything in the Nix store is publicly readable by all operating system users. And maybe this isn't like a huge deal breaker if you're used to Drupal hosting, where like most of our configuration and API keys are stored in like plain text. But it could be an issue if you have multiple clients accessing the same system. You wouldn't want something like your database password to be revealed to them. So there are some tools you could use to mitigate this. There's a tool called SOPS Nix. It's a secrets provisioning tool for Nix. It allows you to declare and store your secrets in a reproducible way and manage them just like you would the rest of your system. Or a lot of services also have something called the password file option. It allows you to define where to store a plain text, well, encrypted password somewhere in your system and just let the Linux permission system protect it for you. So those are both techniques to keep your database password out of Nix store. So I have some more development planned for this tool. I've set up a Drupal.org project to track work and contributions to this project. So if you or your organization want to get involved and earn some contribution credits, I encourage you to check that out. I'm also looking at building some official documentation for the Drupal.org website so that non-Nix folks can kind of get into this and learn about how to use it. And I'm also looking at how to integrate with Drupal Flake so that there is a single Nix-based tool for both development and deployment. So you just have one-stop shop and you're all done. Okay, so that's my talk. Here are those resources I promised. These are all links. I'm going to be sharing this slide deck at the end of the talk, so you can download this, click around, learn what you need to. There's a lot of really fascinating things in the Nix ecosystem I would encourage you to check out. Of course, the learning links are fantastic. There's some community links where you can join and get involved on the right-hand side. And then there's some kind of more ecosystem tools and sort of like some weird esoteric stuff in the Nix ecosystem that I would encourage you to check out because it's very cool. Okay, so that's it. That's my talk. Here's that link I was talking to you about, and you can also scan that QR. I'll take your questions.
Any questions for Andrew?
Yeah, that was a great talk. Thank you so much. So just more for my interest, it might seem hopelessly naive, but once this is in production, what does the typical maintenance workflow look like for something like this in production?
Right, so that's the thing. I don't know yet. I haven't actually done that kind of work, but I'm curious to see how people like you respond to it. I do know that there is a project in that bottom left-hand corner called NixOS. It brings some DevOps, sort of like things that you would expect, and applies them in a Nix-forward way. This project is actually on the second or third iteration at this point. It's still kind of being hashed out. People are trying to figure out how to do it. I know I was kind of Docker bashing a minute ago, but you could just deploy Nix in Docker and just follow your traditional workflow that way. But it takes away some of the configuration pains that come. So that would be a technique I would look at.
Cool. Just a quick announcement, we're running 10 minutes late. If you want a tea or coffee, you can have down now. The next talk starts in about 10 minutes. Otherwise, please continue to ask the question. Any more questions?
Paste in the right place.
Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Are there any hosting platforms that are using Nix?
Yes, there are. I would look at Hetzner Cloud in Europe. They have a really Nix-forward way of handling things, and I think that I think DigitalOcean also has some Nix containers as well. The official NixOS wiki has a full list of all of the official hosting providers. I would go check that out.
I think I heard, I was talking to Upspun, and I feel like they would be using, they mentioned it. That's why I heard it,
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm starting to see it pop up in a lot more places now. So, you could even just put it in your own VPS and try it out, and see how that serves you.